proper document to give them the background, history of Karbala, what happened to Imam Hussain, who was he, where did he come from, was he killed in Karbala. So this was the initial start back in 1982. At that time, Arbaeen was in December, so it was in the winter. It was a very cold day. We started in Hyde Park, a place called Reformers Tree. And at the time, this is obviously during the Iran-Iraq war, so having a sort of initially a Shia sort of procession was a new thing to have in London. There was a lot of police from Scotland Yard there. In fact, in the first year, there were probably more police there than there were actual participants. There probably was, I'm guessing, about 100 or 200 people turned up on the day, but at a time, there were probably similar amount of police in several coaches which were there to look after the event. So that was back in 1982. Since then, it's become by far the largest procession for the mourning of Imam Hussain Islam, probably in the West, in Europe and America. In terms of size, we can talk about up to 10 to 15,000 people on the day which come. The message of Imam Hussain is perhaps even more relevant today in terms of his stance for freedom against tyranny, and especially with things like happening today with ISIS and Daesh and these sort of people claiming to be Muslims or the Caliphate, claiming to be righteous people. Well, those are the sort of people which Imam Hussain salam stood against and gave his life for. And so, especially last year, when we had many banners saying no to ISIS, no to terrorism, it did catch the media. On the next day, we had The Sun, which is the largest tabloid paper in the UK, with a former leadership, who basically praised the event on page 8, saying that we wish we see more Muslims like those which came out on Sunday denouncing ISIS and terrorism. But both things are linked, as Imam Hussain and the struggle for freedom is a universal message. Most Muslims are aware of the various quotations from various people like Charles Dickens, for example, and other historians about Imam Hussain. But now I think finally we're bringing the name of Imam Hussain to the streets in terms of the public now understanding more and more about who he was. And we do get people who attend the procession, from all backgrounds, not just Muslims. And we've even got volunteers who are, shall we say, they're Christians, but they understand and have a passion for Imam Hussain, who volunteer on the day, as an example.
Well, there's a universality, I think, to his message, because it's a stand for freedom, a stand for justice, which is actually what Islam is all about. And I find it very interesting how, because I believe that every year, the procession is getting bigger and bigger and has, kind of a big social impact, I would say. On the UK, because as you mentioned earlier, with this stance against terrorism, you actually almost, I would say, re-manifesting the message of Imam Hussain by, declaring again and again, that Islam actually is in opposition, of any form of tyranny. And of course, if this comes, by the form of terrorism or, whatever, theo-fascism, then this is what Islam and Muslim will do. They will oppose it. So yes, I think there's a great relevance today, and I think that it's interesting how people are catching on to it and understanding the difference in between, what certain Muslim or so-called Muslim groups are claiming for themselves, when in fact what they're doing is actually, stand against Islam, and what Muslims are trying to do, which is to oppose terrorism and violence by actually carrying the banner of Imam Hussain peacefully. Because I think that, I would say that's the biggest message of all, is that the Arbaeen procession is about, it's a peaceful demonstration. It's not a call for violence or anything. It's a call for remembrance, if I'm not mistaken.
No, no doubt. Traditionally, and it's very important to remember that the Arbaeen procession is a mourning event primarily. That we are here for us, on the most solemn day, on the day of Arbaeen, when the survivors of Karbala arrived back after spending a year in prison. Women and children mainly were in that group which arrived in Karbala. And similarly, we always encourage, people have this stereotyping that with Islamic events, it's always just men only But you'll find on the Arbaeen, we have as many women and children
Mm-hmm.
as men which participate. It makes it very much more of a family atmosphere in terms of, look, you can see we're all out here. We've got from babies who are 2 months old to people who are in wheelchairs who are 95 years old. We have, literally thousands of women turn out on the day in the cold. Remember, it's still winter time when we have the Arbaeen, and it's amazing to see how everyone come together to mourn for Imam Hussain, but also to explain his values and teaching, which are relevant today, as we said earlier, regarding terrorism, regarding ISIS, and these sort of bodies who are trying to claim to be Islamic, and we're trying to sort of take back, the real image of Islam
Mm-hmm.
to the streets. Because this is once a year when we come out on the streets. Normally we have our events inside the mosques and centres. This is one event where we're outside, we're in the centre of London, a very prominent location in Marble Arch, going down Park Lane towards Buckingham Palace, the Queen's residence, and then we turn back. It's a very slow-moving event. We have initially we used to have everything used to be in Arabic. Now nearly all of our flags, all of our placards, are all in English. We have children at the front holding small lanterns with the name Sakina on, and these are small lanterns with a large banner saying that these children are walking in honor of a 4-year-old daughter of Imam Hussein who was killed, who died in Damascus. We have all these sorts of groups taking place just to remind us that children who died.
Mm-hmm.
Imam's family died, members died. They were all sought for what reason? For freedom. That's all their only crime was. They wanted freedom. They wanted justice in the world. And that's what the Prophet's family had always portrayed, that all we want is to live in a free society, in a just society. And when people or groups claiming to be Muslims especially try to hijack Islam, we have to, I think we're finally being heard. People are now finally listening
Yes.
to us. And we get great, it's amazing how, especially when we have these banners, say that we are Muslims and we are followers of Imam Hussein and we are against these things, you'd be surprised how many people stop from the pub and thank us. And we have an education team
Mm-hmm.
who go around just to explain what we're doing. And they wear these special sort of waistcoats which are blue, saying education on the back, information. And it's so much. It's so nice to hear so many people who are so interested about. Okay, we never knew that Muslims were against ISIS. We never knew they were against terrorism. We always thought you were the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important on the day of Arbaeen to do two things. It's one, to get as many women and children and men out on the streets of London to commemorate this event, and at the same time to give that positive image of what Islam is what it's about, because it's an upward struggle. We always it's always a struggle for us. In a way, our jihad is what? Our jihad is to get our message across.
Well,
That's our jihad.
this is what I say all the time in my writing. It's actually, the word jihad has been, I would say, hijacked, just the same as Islam has been, because a lot of people just associate, the word jihad with violence and war, when in fact it's actually education. It's the betterment of humanity through peaceful means, which means, for someone to strive for better. It has nothing to do with violence. If anything, violence is actually frowned upon, and is only tolerated and authorized when in an act of self-defense. This, and I think this is what Arbaeen as well represents, and is, what you were talking about: education, freedom, justice, and peace. This invitation, Islam is an invitation. It's not forced upon. It's actually, as the Quran says, in religion there should be no compulsion. You can't force someone to believe in something or to agree to a truth if it's not what they want. I want to talk to you very briefly to you kind of touch upon the subject of history, because Arbaeen as well is, as you said, a commemoration of a remembrance of, the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and his family. Because we have a grand debate, I think, nowadays in Islam, where we are not allowed to mention certain events in our history because, I believe that certain factions feel that it's a threat to them, and that they feel that there's a lot of criticism, when even when criticism is not actually what people meant. What they meant is only debate and trying to understand our past, so that the mistake that were made are not repeated, and maybe to try to understand why we are facing today the terror that we're facing today, or why there are certain divides within our community, to try to heal rather than divide further. So, to which extent do you think that Arbaeen plays a very important symbol in, not just for the British community, Muslim community, but for the world in general? Because it is a grandstand. It is, I would say, a token of love, and gratefulness. I mean, I think that when Muslim looked upon Imam Hussein's sacrifice, they are very thankful for him and for the message that he carried and the path that he opened up for other people, and the stand that he made. He showed us how to behave, when faced with absolute tyranny, and the courage that it takes to actually enact Islam. So what do you think today? Is it even more relevant than, I would say, maybe in prior times where, Islam was not so misrepresented or so much under attack, by certain factions?
I think there has been in the past, within the Muslim community as a whole, where some people, both in the Shia community and in other communities in the Muslim sort of family, have wanted us not to talk about Karbala and Imam Hussein and this tragedy and what happened, and Arbaeen and Ashura. And the reason perhaps being is because we have to remember, like ISIS, the Muslims are the biggest victims of ISIS. Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his followers and his family were also killed by so-called Muslims. And that's what perhaps causes some people a bit of concern or discomfort that we should discuss this because he was killed. The grandson of the Prophet was killed by so-called Muslims. But I think now with the growing age of the internet and satellite TV, where it's so much easier, if you type in Imam Hussein or Hussein on the internet, you'll find out straight away who he was, where he came from, why he died, who killed him. And I think there's now, especially this day and age, there's an even bigger opportunity, or should we say, for us to sort of hear, if we want a hero, if we want somebody in the Islamic history who gave his life for freedom, for humanity, this is your shining example. If you want an example of a person who you can hold up high, who cannot be touched, who's done, in a way, European values, Western values, values of freedom, nothing is greater than the values of Imam Hussein in that respect when it comes to freedom. So I think, those people, we have to be careful because people get sensitive about condemning other people. Yes, by all means, let's be sensitive and not, be careful not to hurt other people's feelings within the Muslim family. But we have to at least say what happened and why it happened. And the reason why we commemorate is to remember this greatest sacrifice and to make sure that people understand this is the family's prophet. These are their values. These are the real values of Islam. And by commemorating this event, we're on the streets of London. We are in a way we're rejuvenating Islam, reminding people this is Islam. This is what Islam is really about. And this is the finest example of a person, of a group of people, a very small group of people. We're talking about about 100 people who, in the middle of nowhere, in Iraq, on the sands, in a desert plain where there was no villages, no one nearby, gave their life for humanity and for freedom. And whatever people may have, problems politically, there's nothing better than this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm very grateful for your explanation, and I'm sure our readers will enjoy it as well. So thank you again.
That's fine. Thanks very much. And this year's event, of course, is on the 20th of November.
Yes.
At Mar Blanche, London, at 11 o'clock.
Okay, wonderful.